Still waiting for the bar to slowly make its way to the end. Okay, looks like we are live on YouTube now, just waiting for people to find us.
Okay.
Okay.
There's about a 20-second delay in what we say and what the YouTube shows. So I forgot about that. I was talking, I heard my own voice 20 seconds later.
Well, it's a little past 6:30, so maybe we'll get started, and people can join us as they come on. First of all, I want to welcome everybody to this visit with Jim Merkel, the author of Growing Up St. Louis. This is sponsored by the Friends of the Washington Public Library, and we're glad that you're here with us tonight. I'd just like to make a few comments about Jim before we have him begin his program, but he wrote, "The way you spend your childhood years really determines who you become as an adult. That seems obvious, but people really don't think about it. It's a very important time in one's life." Jim's book is a collection of stories from more than 100 native St. Louisans. The stories are told in their own words. Some of the interviews involve well-known people that you'll recognize their names, and most of the stories are just, so to speak, ordinary people who share their life experiences as children. So we look forward to hearing Jim, and if you have comments to share or questions to raise, you can use the chat function down at the bottom of your screen and just type your question or your comments in there, and Nelson will monitor them and share them with Jim when he can get a word in edgewise, or maybe we'll wait.
Sure.
Okay, so Jim, you can take it away.
Okay. Now, around 1956, my kindergarten teacher wrote a report card that did more than tell about my progress in school. It predicted my future course in life. Gretchen L. Kilpatrick wrote, "Jimmy has been a pleasure to have. His sense of humor has pepped us up at times. He tries hard and is a good little worker. But," she added, "he should work on his scatterbrain forgetfulness, though." Now that pretty much sums up things for yours truly. Who is, if I can get this right, is this work going to work? Who is shown right here when I was about for first grade. You know, I love to joke, and funny. And sometimes I even pep them up, like she said. But I'm still scatterbrained, and I still need to work on my forgetfulness, whether it's forgetting that key or all kinds of other things. So but here's the important thing, and we just talked about that. The events had an effect on who I am today, because, and here's much of who we are is because of who we were as children. Remember Citizen Kane? Oh, we all do. His last words were, "Rosebud." The plot centered around the search for its meaning. At the end, it turned out that Rosebud was the sled he had when he was a kid and was at the moment of great loss. It seems his whole life was a search for Rosebud. Not long ago, I heard an observation from Paul McCartney. "I'm still that little kid that grew up in Liverpool." I'm not even going to try to give the accent. He said, "But for me and for everyone in this book, the words are, we're still those little kids that grew up in St. Louis, or were still those little kids that grew up in Washington. I thought often of my childhood memories and got an idea. To discover the memories of others, more than 100 of them, in fact, in a book about their experiences growing up in St. Louis. It makes sense, really, but I discovered it for a certainty when I wrote this book, Growing Up St. Louis. Looking back through the decades, I outlined my plan for a whole book of memories in an email to my publisher in January 2017. They'll be all ages, from elementary school to centenarian. They'll be black, white, female, rich, poor, with happy childhoods and sad ones. They'll have only one thing in common: St. Louis. Then I'd boil it down, their experience boiling it down, and put them in a book about growing up in our town. That's not hard to do. Little did I know. In fact, it was a monster. By far the most difficult of my 5 books I've written about St. Louis. But finding people with an even mix of ages, sexes, races, and personal interests isn't easy. Neither is stepping way out and approaching somebody. Imagine asking a stranger who is nothing like you if he would mind being grilled about personal details of his childhood. I got my share of no's. Some of the guesses turned into no's when a person stood me up for an appointment. Nothing like driving 10 miles and going into a restaurant and finding the person you wanted to meet with isn't there. Now, I don't blame them. I respect them actually, because they didn't have to do this. On the other hand, I loved it when somebody took a chance, and now we're in the book I'm talking about. Now, I found my subjects in all kinds of ways, including walking up to somebody with green hair and asking for an interview. Some were relatives or friends of relatives and friends. Some came from my church or a request through Facebook. I called PR people, anybody really, to ask for help for a certain kind of person that I didn't see was in there. In a few cases, I don't know how I got linked up. Now, around 25 of them came from the St. Louis Public Library. I spent 4 Saturdays. In October 2017 at different branches of the library, just sitting in a room and waiting for people to come up. From the first Saturday to the last, my subjects didn't disappoint. Their stories were marvelous and provided a perspective that I probably wouldn't have elsewhere. Now, they were very interesting, all very interesting. And one reason was the kind of person who would see something on a bulletin board and say, would you like to do this? It has to be pretty interesting. So what a joy to meet so many different kinds of people, all with their own stories. But everybody I talked to was interesting. Now, I'm happy that many of the people I interviewed became friends. 18 of them met me for lunch one Sunday afternoon in late March 2019 at CJ Muggs in downtown Webster Groves to tell their stories. The tale of the 18 were amazingly different. So were the stories of everybody I interviewed. Now, see the guy in the back toward the right with the big with the white hair. He told me about Kennedy, the day that Kennedy was shot, and he was going home after he'd been dismissed from school, and he said everybody looked stunned, and so this one right here is if you see this one, she had a child at I think 16, 15 or 16. Um, and it's interesting things about what happened afterwards. Um, now, of course, the tales, all of them were amazingly different. So were the stories of everybody I interviewed. So I'm going to go over some. Uh, Now, this one, to the girl to the left was Dorothy Hunter. She was born in 1907. She was 109 when I interviewed her early in 2017. She died a few months later at the age of 110. She told me she lived in this 3-story brick house south of Tower Grove Park. And she told me also about going with her family to Union Station to watch her uncle go off to World War One. Now imagine that in 2009, you hear a story. 2019, you hear a story about somebody, a relative who was going off to the Great War. Amazing. Now her father did not permit chewing gum. He's very strict about this. Right then, there, my uncle gave each of the kids a package of chewing gum. Ha 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 ha. A whole package, and we were in seventh heaven, and there wasn't a thing my father could say because this was a gift from a man who was almost at war. She had other memories, marvelous memories. It was either take the streetcar or walk, she said. There was one car on Arsenal Street and one on Grand. I walked to the streetcar. One time I walked to the streetcar, and that was when I had passes up to a certain age. And the conductor refused to take my ticket because he thought I was too old. I wasn't too old, I was just tall. Then I got off the car and got on the next car. Now, she described her her experiences lovingly. It says, if I had to use one word about the way we were brought up, what my father believed in, it was moderation. Now, here's another woman. She wasn't quite that old, but this is Margaret Whitaker celebrating she was celebrating her 104th birthday in 2017. She had a story to tell about standing up for women's rights way back in the 1920s. Her family lived west of Kirkwood, so her father would have to pay for her to go to Kirkwood High School, but he didn't want her to go to high school. But she wanted to go to high school and did. He says, I did it myself. I wanted to go. I always wanted to be a teacher, and I did. I had to talk to the superintendent of schools, and he told me that I should go to Kirkwood and live with this woman as a maid and take care of her and look out for her. She worked for the county newspaper. I lived with her for 5 years and finished high school. I was right near school. I could walk. So she graduated from Kirkwood High School and she became a school teacher, and that was what she did all her life. Here is another one of the 100 set. Louise Jimerson was born in 1917 and grew up in Madison, Illinois. Here's a picture of her when she was 100. Like many African Americans, she talked about encounters with racism, but she also told about a great family life and tradition which the African Americans had in spite of everything they went through. She said, we used to have 14 grocery stores here during my childhood, grocery stores on every corner. I remember chicken neck bones were 3 pounds for 25 cents, and Wonder Bread was 5 cents a loaf. We got candy and pickles and gum. I remember my mother used to cook a lot of potatoes. My grandmother used to bake some cookies for us, sugar cookies, we called them. My grandmother and my mother would cook Sunday dinner, and we'd have fried chicken, mashed potatoes, peas, potato pie, pecan pie, apple cobbler, peach cobbler, cherry cobbler. Ooh, my grandmother and my mother always would can fruit in the fall. They made them into preserves, strawberry preserves, peach preserves, blackberry preserves. My dad was the custodian at Dunbar School in Madison for 30 years, and my mother was a homemaker. It was my grandmother who lived with us who did the disciplining. Now, this I'll stop for a minute and note that in the different people I heard from, talk to African Americans, it's the grandmother who does the disciplining, and it was with a little stick that smarted. Now, she always would spank me, she said. Next door to me was my uncle. He'd be all over at our place. It seems like we always had 7 or 8 people there. I went to visit one of my aunts in Memphis when he was 13 years old. She told me how to get to downtown in Memphis on the streetcar. Now, there weren't buses then. I remember sitting on the front row behind the conductor, and the conductor looked back at me. He said, "Girlie," he called me, "Girlie, where are you from? New York?" And I told him, "No, I was from St. Louis." And he told me, "Next time you get on this streetcar, you go back as far as the white stop on this car." When I got off, he said, "You remember what I told you." Now, here's another one. Madeline Gaish. My mother, she was a good lady, a hardworking lady, and my father was a nice, good man, at least the way I remember him. I don't have bad feelings for him. Then he met this lady, and you know how ladies can be. He was with her, and she was not going to accept just living with somebody. She wanted marriage, and that's what she insisted on. So he asked my mother for a divorce, but she did not want it. And so he left her, which was awful. I don't even like to tell the story. Then I woke up one morning and my mother was gone too. They took her to the hospital, but it was too late. I was just 8 years old when she died. I, my brother, who was 18 or 19 at the time, stuck with me and stayed with me until I got a home, and then he left. I had heard that he lived in California for a while, but I've never seen him since. And that's hard too. It's just sad to think about it. After that, my uncle tried to get a home for me instead of putting me in an orphanage. Elsie and Charles Predrati took me from there. My mother had died and I needed a home, and they didn't want to put me in an orphanage. So they raised me. They were very good parents. They sent me to Catholic school and they had me baptized. First thing, I had a very good life with them, especially after losing the rest of my family. Here is Elizabeth June Harper. We lived right at Oakland and Kings Highway on Arco Avenue, right behind St. Louis University High School. The Depression was hard because money was very tight, and we were pretty poor. By trade, Dad was a butcher, but to make ends meet, he just did odd jobs. He did a little tree work, or he did some painting. He was very good at carpentry work. He was very talented in whatever he set out to do. It seems like he could do anything. Mother took in washing and ironing for a while. Later on, she worked for Sears and Roebuck on Kings Highway. A lot of men wanted odd jobs around the house, and my mother would give them a sandwich or something. We always had a little girl garden in the back, and she was generous. We heard that they were giving shoes out to the people that needed it. So somebody took us downtown and got us a pair of shoes. Oh, but instead of coming to a point are rounded at the toe. They came straight across. Oh, like a box. Ugly brown. I hated them, but I had to wear them. Now, everybody in our neighborhood lived like the Scrubby Dutch. Now, the Scrubby Dutch, then this is my comment, that was South St. Louis. These were people who were almost obsessive, I guess in a good way, about just getting everything clean. And if you didn't do it regularly, you were not, the people didn't like you. That meant we kept our houses scrubbed sparkling clean. I scoured the outside of our house many times, always the steps. We used Comet or whatever they had then. We scrubbed those concrete steps so clean, and we used to think it was fun. You didn't dare walk up the stairs if your shoes were dirty. Here is somebody that I really feel something in my heart about. This is my Uncle Sid. He died a few years, about 2 or 3 years ago at 91. And this is his little brother, my Uncle Donald. And I really have some good feelings about them. And here's what my uncle said. It's Uncle Sid. He was born in 1927. When times were hard, nobody would buy anything in hardware stores. So my dad lost his hardware store in Old Orchard in Webster Groves. He moved all his stuff into the basement. My job was to go get the lawnmowers and bring it to him to sharpen. After he lost the store, my dad got a job at a hat company. During the Depression, my mother took care of 3 old ladies. The neighbors behind us, they were really poor, and we kind of helped them too. That's how we got through. Everybody helping out. There wasn't any politics. On my 5th birthday, August 6th, 1932, I got a beautiful red wagon. I rode the wagon down Tuxedo onto Laclede Station Road, where a big truck carrying rocks ran over me. A doctor was behind me and brought me to the hospital. All the while I was crying because my red wagon was gone. Now August 6th was always, his birthday was always a special time to him. He got out of high school early in 45, and he was headed to Japan when they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima on August 6th, 45. So you could tell why he might have been saved right there. You didn't dare say to him, well, maybe that we didn't have to drop the bomb. So that was special time. So this right here, Marjorie Jones Raker, born in 1923. Now she grew up in DeSoto, Missouri, and in the 1930s, sooty high sulfur coal from southern Illinois powered St. Louis's furnaces, factories, and trains, and they darkened the daytime sky and covered everything with a dark dust. Now, going to St. Louis from DeSoto was she said this, going to St. Louis from DeSoto was a 3-hour trip, and occasionally we did have to come to St. Louis on a shopping trip. I remember being at Famous Bar downtown, coming out the 7th Street side, and not being able to see the Forum cafeteria across the streets because of all the smoke. When we got home to DeSoto, after one of those shopping trips, we wiped our faces with Kleenex, and it was black with smoke. I know people in DeSoto who had moved away from St. Louis to escape the smoke for their health. Now, I never had to worry about where my next meal was coming from, but I know there were people in my class at school who did. I remember people coming out to our house for food. They were never turned down. They would sit on my back step and eat a sandwich. World War II and the Great Depression were the defining events of my lifetime and my husband's family. Now, the Depression ended with the start of World War II, but in many ways, kids' lives still were hard. After that, those who experienced the Depression focused on one thought: our kids will have it better than we did. They lavished themselves on their kids. With dad at work and mom at home, all kinds of kids found themselves amidst the greatest period of prosperity in the history of the world. Again and again, people related how they went out after breakfast and didn't come back until lunch. They scampered off with instructions to come home before the street lights came on. This was as close to universal as you can get. In fact, I was talking to somebody, Bill Schwab, with the library, um, before I started, and he told a story about the same thing, coming in at a certain time. But it was as close to universal as you can get. And so this is one of them. Cora French Katzen. She was born in '93, so technically she wasn't a baby boomer. I mean, in '43 rather, but she's in the middle, and she told her own story. Uh, I grew up in the most wonderful neighborhood of all, South St. Louis, 1.5 blocks from Shaw's Garden and 3 blocks from Tower Grove Park. These were my playgrounds. The center street, Shenandoah, was tree lined, forming an arch over the street. We walked to school, we walked to the Admiral, we walked to shop. We we knew almost all of our neighbors, and they knew us. Back then, there were no bomb threats, no terrorists, no guns, no gangs. There were movie theaters we could walk to, doctors, dentists, clothing stores, shoe stores, candy stores, and even a smelly place where you could choose a live chicken to be butchered for Sunday dinners. We played outside until the street lights came on and were free to be just kids. That meant we could play hide and go seek, kick the tin can down the alley, and hide out in the ash pits, climb trees, and roam in the parks. Now, I've this was she was one of the people who I found at the library, and she had such a wonderful personality. Oh, now this right here, this is John Burns. He came to, I guess he was about 3 years old when he came to Ferguson uh, in 1951. And this is his story. We had kind of a herd mentality. There were 20 kids living on the same cul-de-sac with us. We got kicked out of the house in the morning during summer, and we had to come home back for dinner. The cowbell was how she communicated with us. We ran around and did all kinds of things until that cowbell rang. Now we were on the same party line. Anybody here remember the party line? And you knew when someone got on the phone, if you were talking, you got off. Oh, it's you? Oh, okay, I'll call you back. Thanks, bye. Then finally, the phone man came in to separate phones to give everybody a private line. So the phone guy going to each of the houses came to my house and he says, "Are you all related?" And my mother says, "No, why do you say that?" Well, all the kids ran to this house and then they went through all of the houses. Now, when I lived in Ferguson, the Wabash train that went downtown would sound a horn in the evening. To me, it was like a familiar friend. At night, when you heard that, it was kind of saying, everybody's okay. It's always stuck with me. And later on, when I visited my grandmother in Pittsburgh, they had a streetcar that made the same noise as it went down the rails. I love that familiar sound. Now, here's another one. Monroe Smith, born in 52. Now you may wonder what San Francisco Giant great Willie Mays is doing here. Well, I'll tell you. Here's a story. My dad barnstormed in the Negro Leagues down in Mississippi with the Memphis Red Sox. The story that's better for me is how he turned me into a baseball player. He played semi-pro baseball in Tandy Park in front of Sumner High School in the 1950s. But the year he broke his ankle sliding into home plate was the year that my little league baseball career started. That's when he started coaching me. The first year, he got 60 boys and 8 dads on a baseball diamond in Fairground Park. Out of those 60 boys, 3 teams came about. We were some of the first teams in Matthews Dickey Boys and Girls Club. Dad would get all kinds of things for the team. He got his company to sponsor our uniforms. Our block unit sponsored our uniforms and equipment, as did some of his friends who owned businesses. We went to a barber shop, and back in those times, the African American players for the Cardinals and visiting teams could not stay at the hotels. So any time a black player came from out of town, they started in a rooming house near the barber shop. It was my neighbor's shop. We got to meet everybody. Willie Mays, that's the guy you're seeing right there. Hank Aaron and Jackie Robinson. All of the famous African American baseball players of the time. We also got to meet football and basketball players all at this one barbershop because it was walking distance from the boarding house. Now, Kirk Flood came into the shop to get his hair cut and to socialize. Because he was shorter and smaller than my dad, I said, "Dad, who is this guy?" Now, I remember talking to him at a coffee shop. We spent 2 hours together, and he was always laughing and joking. Great guy. Now, they called this generation the baby boomers because there were so many of them. They were the ones who watched Leave It to Beaver and visited the Admiral every summer. We grew up with the Beatles and went to dances with Bob Cuban. And you know something? We weren't grateful. We even rebelled at the idea of going off to the war. Now, one of those who rebelled was William Quinlan. He told me this. And it was kind of a ridiculous story about that that the principal couldn't give him a little leeway. He says, when I was a senior at Southwest High School, I participated in helping put together an underground newspaper. There were kids from 32 or 33 high schools working together on it. The day it was published in 1969, while we were distributing issues, we were all kicked out of high school. And again, couldn't you just say if you do that again, you're kicked out? I don't know. And he says, I went to a farm of night school for students who'd been expelled. There were kids that were kicked out for various reasons, including some girls who were pregnant. In those days, if you got pregnant, you finished in night school. It was just sort of a mixed group of kids. I don't remember if it was more than 2 or 3 years. So the baby boom years began as a joyful time. It became less so as the 60s progressed and we experienced assassination and the war in Vietnam. By the 70s, we were in full-fledged funk, but there was still some joy. Here, this guy is Kirk Walker. He was born in 68. He's with his cousin. And interestingly, you know, the stories about how people who had long hair wound up getting bald. Now, that's what happened to the guy at the right, his cousin. But He's, I'm sure he's a great guy anyway. Uh, Now, this is a Kurt story. The September prior to my birth, my parents moved from North City to University City. We were the second Black family on my block. My family still owns the house. Next door was this family, and last name Linthicum. And my dad went into business with Jack Linthicum. And they had a landscaping company for years, and they loved each other dearly. Jack went on to open up a plant nursery on Lindbergh. Now, at the time he opened that business, he asked my dad, "Do you want to come? We'll do it together." And my dad said, "No," because he wasn't a risk taker. "I'll just stay at Jewish Hospital, my full time job." So they ended up being great friends to the day I buried my dad a couple years ago. Jack was there. I remember growing up as a kid, we had all these pictures of the family over the fireplace mantle. I'm the youngest of 6 siblings, so there was a lot of faces there. And there was just like a little white girl with long straight hair. These were my parents' goddaughter. Her name was Hockmeister. And there was this Jewish guy my dad and my mom loved doing business with named Rosen. In my house, I saw all races of people. Darren Seals, born 1969. Even though my parents had good jobs, they would pass down the shoes. By selling drugs, I had enough money to buy my own shoes. Everything was based on my shoes. I'd go out of the house with the shoes mom gave me and look under the porch to get my own shoes. I got clothes, shoes, jewelry, girls. If you want a car, you've got to get out there and do what they need to. You need to get it. You're looking at being a freshman in high school, netting 3,000 or 4,000 a month. Once my mother did find out, she said, "I've got to go." I went to Northwest High School in my freshman and sophomore years, and they got put out for fighting. I played baseball well, so Oakland High School accepted me as a desegregation student. I didn't sell drugs there because I had a purpose. I had made D's and F's in the city, but I had a C average with only a couple of D's in Oakville. I made a few friends who knew I was determined, and an English teacher encouraged me. If I was still out in Oakville, I'd probably be a professional baseball player. This guy is Ramel Ray Wallace. He was born in 78, and today he's doing well as a St. Louis police officer. But his life was grim when he was in 5th grade and lived at the corner of Clay and Penrose in North St. Louis. He's standing in front of the apartment building where he lives at that time, and he recalls a an incident where he saw something awful. I'll say it briefly. Uh, it says he saw somebody get into a tussle with an older man, and supposedly this young man had done something to the older man's daughter. I remember the conversation getting louder and louder, and I heard somebody scream, and then pow! I looked down the street, and I could see that he had a shotgun, and there was a struggle over it. The gun went off, and the younger man got shot in the face. It was like a movie. He fell back first and smashed into the street while everybody started screaming. I remember seeing the blood and everything flying in the air. I still don't know if he lived. He got up, and a couple of his buddies kind of trotted away with him, and my mother was grabbing us and throwing us in the house. So rough times. Some people make it, some people don't. The guy I told you about um, was Darren Seals. After high school, uh, he was shot at 4 different times, shot 4 different times. Uh, but he turned his life around, and today he's involved in the Cure Violence program in St. Louis to help reach out to people who could commit crimes. Uh, so he and this one, you see over to the right, the girl with all the bushy red hair. Her her name is Anna Marie Nart, and she was born in '88, and she had a much happier thing. Every day at school, we would pretty much spend the daylight hours together, and we had elaborate imaginary games that we had devised that kept us pretty busy. In the summer, I know we spent the majority of the day exploring the creek in the Crestmont Park, climbing trees, playing games. We would spend hours and hours in that creek exploring. I think we were really lucky that we were just old enough to have a childhood free from screens and electronic devices. I did not play or see a video game until I was 12 and saw it in my cousin's house. I think so. Wonderful stories, and it just shows you where you're born. But now our parents, now just in general speaking, our parents knew want and out war, and we had everything. My parents, the baby boomers, I always thought we were so different. But the difference between us and kids today is gigantic. If you told somebody today you allowed your child to walk around for hours on end, she would think you're irresponsible. In numerous ways, kids of the 2000s were in a vastly different world than their parents and grandparents. Interracial marriage is taken as normal. Same-sex marriage, in which spouses have the right to adopt, may not have quite the degree of public acceptance, but it's getting that way. For many parents, the structured play date replaced unsupervised play with any kid who was available in the neighborhood. And the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported in 2016 that 1 out of 20 children took medicine for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Now, these are just some of the ways, the changes that have happened that don't necessarily have anything to do with the advance of technology. Shakespeare easily could have had the kids of the 2000s in mind when he penned the words, "Oh, brave new world that has such people in it." Generation Z, born from 1995 to 2015, is vastly different. Now, here is one member of that generation, Tabitha Stowers. She was born in 2000, and she became Kirkwood's homecoming queen on November 4th, 2017. She admitted to me that she sometimes would use her phone in class, but only after she had free time, after she did her work in class. "I text like every day," she said. "How often?" "Probably like every 5 minutes." She said, Tabitha is mixed race, and she said, "I feel like I'm torn sometimes with situations that happen in St. Louis. It feels like I have to pick sides all the time. Sometimes me and my dad had talks. He told me to be cautious. I know we've gotten pulled over before. He says that the reasons he got pulled over is because he's African American." Now, everybody's been pretty accepting of me, especially at school, because there are a lot of mixed race kids at my school too. Now, there's one more. Milo Marston. He is the youngest. He's very smart. He lives in uh, St. Louis. In fact, he lives. You see that he's holding the picture of Dorothy Hunter, and he's standing in front of Dorothy Hunter. She was the oldest, and both he and Dorothy Hunter grew up on the same block. If you can imagine that. I mean, that was an incredible coincidence. So, like I say, there is many kids today, as always, they have many, many struggles. But if it seems like that there's one thing, those in my book had lived many ways through many struck things. I'd love to hear them talk in 50 years from now, about their memories of the pandemic. That would be an interesting book by itself. But they survived. They made friends, and they imagined the mud pies they made were castles. They endured tragedy or lived around loving parents who filled their lives with happy events. Kids today face disaster like climate change, war, and an exploding world population. But whatever else they do, kids today still act like kids. I'll take some. Here's where you can get it. Where you can get my autograph. I'll take some questions, and it's been a pleasure. I'm sure it's still being a pleasure right now.
Nelson, are there any comments or questions in the chat?
Not yet. I'm monitoring it. Nothing has come through yet. But I can certainly go first. Do you have any questions, Bill?
No, go right ahead.
I had a question just on length of the chapters of some of this, just kind of an interest, just looking at how you decided on that, or was it just some of them are going for a page or two, and some of them are literally like 2 or 3 sentences long?
Well, yeah, it's like we did go in a different direction at first. I was going to be part of a larger book, but we just, the decision was made to just have the quotations, which was some extra work, but I think it did pretty well. And I just would, in some cases, I would just write everything I had down, and I write all the quotes down, and then I would just say, well, this one is good. And of course, a lot of great stuff was gone, but that's what always happens, whether in a TV program or what, it goes in the cutting room floor. And but I think we got some good stuff, and about what it's like to be a kid. And I think it's so important. It's good to it's a good exercise, and I really enjoyed doing it, finding out, going beyond. Says what's it like, memories of childhood, and what's it really like.
One of the things that struck me was your encouragement to grab your phone or some kind of a tape recorder and interview people in your own family, in your own neighborhood.
Oh, that's always good.
Yeah, it prompted me to sit down and write a letter to a grandson about certain incidents in my early years. And he really appreciated it.
Oh yeah. It's different times. I won't say it's better or worse. There's a quote in the Bible in Ecclesiastic. It says something about don't say that the earlier days were better, because they're all, some things were good and some things weren't. So I and I really got the guy who had who had uh, the memory of uh, all the different people in his neighborhood, the black guy, he's in my church, and I spent a couple hours with him, and really got to be close to him, and I still feel pretty close. So I think that it is good to think about those things. Of course, the fact is, and this is every generation. I remember my my granddad talking about World War I, and how miserable it was. And I don't remember. All I remember is this something about this. This battle was really bad. I don't remember what battle it was, and but he died, and I was in my early 20s, and people don't get, I guess people don't get interested in this stuff until their 40s, you know, and so I think your approach is of just writing it down, you know, that may, so by the time your grandkids get interested, they'll have something,
Yeah.
What was it? Do you have something, Nelson?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick note of the program here we're doing to say that Growing Up St. Louis, just want to remind everyone that it is available at the library, and you can also purchase a copy at Neighborhood Reads if you're
Okay, sure.
interested.
And yeah, that's a very fine place. And I've given a program there before. They so maybe I'll be out there when things get better. And I would say the if you want, I have a website. Not a website. It's a it's a oops, sorry. It is a what happened here? Okay. Uh, it is a group. And if you just look for a group on Facebook called Growing Up St. Louis, it's the same thing. Actually, it was created to promote the book. It's almost entirely old pictures with kids in it. Well, in fact, you have to have pictures, old pictures with kids in it, or I'll get rid of it. And most of them are from the Missouri Historical Society, or the Missouri History Museum. All kinds of wonderful things, and I've gotten close to 1,700 followers, and there's I'm sure there's a lot bigger, but I think it's pretty decent, and I think people would have fun whether they buy the book or not.
And while you were saying that, I went to Facebook and I joined the group. It's that easy.
Oh, wow. Oh, then now you have to give me a book, give me a picture of
I
something
will do
old.
that.
Okay, well, like when you were a kid.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have another question of deep meaning.
Oh.
That's right. I'm going to quote. It's from your introduction, and you talk about you're causing readers to think of their own experiences growing up. But that's not the book's main purpose. Rather, it's to remind us that what happens to us as adults is largely the result of our experiences as children.
Yep. I mean, you sponge it up, and if you have parents who love you and who even if you don't have much, even if you have parents who love you and spend time with you, if you have brothers and sisters and You know, compared to the girl with all the big red hair, to the others that I mentioned who got into drugs or whatever. I you know, it makes so much difference. And of course, well, uh, when you grow up, if you're, you know, there's two kinds of things, but if you know, like I mentioned about uh, being uh, about you know, saying somebody saying, oh, he needs to work on his scatterbrain tendencies, uh, and I never did, and you know, it affected me, uh, but it's, you know, like if your parents, if your dad encouraged you to go into baseball, and you know, if they were are you know, if they read to you, um you'll always be a reader. um so you know, I guess the thing is, anybody who's a parent, you know, just love your kids, you know, love them like crazy. Um and you know, I mean, I know my mom did, and that really helped me. And she said one time, I guess eighth grade or so, you know, I was turned in something, and she looked at what I wrote. You really write well. You know, so look at me. I'm You're a writer. So, and you know, you might not, you know, uh, just love them, and that'll, uh, and I think it'll help. You know.
Well, I think that's a really good note to end on. Love your kids, and for
Hmm.
many of us, love your grandkids.
Hmm.
But thank you very much for your presentation. You
Thank you.
obviously put a lot of work into the presentation as well as the book. And we're hopefully we're able to record this and put it up so that those who weren't able to watch it right now can watch it in the future. So
Okay.
we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Jim, and thank you,
Yeah.
Nelson.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Bill.
Bill and Nelson.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Sure.
Bye-bye.
You're welcome.